Hello everyone, my name is Shona and I'm an accredited paper conservator currently working at the National Library of Scotland. Today I'll be speaking to you along with my colleague, Preventive Conservation Intern Joseph Jackson, about how to care for library and archive collections. In particular, we will discuss what it means to protect and preserve your family history, be that official records housed in a national organisation or personal papers stored in an old shoebox in your house. After all, both public and personal records present a tangible physical link to the past, clues that speak of our identity and our place in the modern world. At the National Library of Scotland, the Conservation Department regularly delivers a tutorial for staff on the safe handling of its collections. New members of staff are automatically enrolled as part of their induction, and existing staff are encouraged to attend whenever they need a refresher session. The presentation that we're about to deliver is based on this staff tutorial. A few years ago, we also created a short film for the public to help them understand their own duty of care towards the collections. Before the pandemic, this was shown on a loop in our cafe. However, you can now find it on the library's YouTube page. For those who are interested, a link to this film will be listed at the end of the presentation, along with the materials and suppliers list and a reference to ICON's conservation register. Much of the damage that library and archive collections sustain is caused by poor handling. When books and documents are moved, their edges can be knocked, their surfaces can be scratched, and they can be accidentally dropped. However, damage can also be cumulative and is not always immediately apparent. This includes the microscopic mechanical stresses associated with opening bindings and turning pages. A culture of good handling significantly reduces the need for conservation treatment. Careful handling also ensures that damaged items are not damaged further. For this reason, most libraries and archives present their visitors with a set of reading room rules. These rules are not imposed in order to create a scholarly ambience or to instill a sense of reverence. They are there to protect and ensure continued access to the collections. The responsibility for ensuring that collections are handled safely lies with those who use them, as much as it does with the custodians. In this presentation, Joe and I will unpack some of the standard reading room rules. We will also describe some of the most common agents of deterioration. It's important to remember that damage caused by one risk can lead to a greater susceptibility to another damaging agent. Environmental, chemical, and structural factors all contribute to the cycle of deterioration, often in an interactive way. However, we will provide some tips enabling you to slow down these reactions so that you can better preserve your own books, family papers, and photographs, and protect the records held within public institutions like the National Library. As family historians, I'm sure that you're familiar with logbooks, ledgers, letters, and photographs. Perhaps you've become the keeper of your own family archive. For the most part, this type of material is what enables you to carry out your research. Even material that has been digitised will exist in physical form somewhere. For this reason, we've divided our presentation into three sections. The first explores books, the second addresses documents and family papers, and the third examines photographs. In each case, we will focus on the preventive aspects of collections care. A broader discussion about remedial treatment or restoration is beyond the scope of this presentation. What's more, the majority of professional conservators do not advocate a DIY approach to document repair. After all, we spend years learning about ethics and material science before attempting to treat anything ourselves. However, at the end of the presentation, we will provide you with some advice about how to find and appoint a reputable conservator. All library and archive collections should be handled minimally and cautiously. However, special collections should be handled with extra care, as these items are often historically important, unique, and irreplaceable. Historic materials can be more susceptible to damage, as they've been around for longer. However, many modern materials are inherently weak or fragile. This is especially true of books, which became less robust with the onset of mass production in the 19th century. The development of synthetic adhesives, cheaply tanned leathers, and paper made from mechanical wood pulp led to a general decline in the quality and long-term stability of books. A large amount of evidence about the ways in which books were sold and circulated in the past has been lost or compromised as a result of well-intentioned but ill-advised repair work. Every binding tells a story, and the less disturbed the evidence, the more chance we have of interpreting that story. Historic bindings can reveal evidence about their previous ownership and use. They may be inscribed with the names of their former owners, or they may carry library stamps showing how and where they were stored. Although everyone knows what a book is, most people do not stop to think about the construction. Most books from the hand press period were made by folding the printed paper and sewing the spine folds onto cords. These cords were then laced into boards before the boards were covered with leather or cloth. Books were either sold as loose sheets to be bound by the purchaser, or were bound for the bookseller and purchased already bound. The diagram shown on screen depicts the principal parts of a typical binding. For an explanation of the different terms, I recommend that you refer to the online bookbinding glossary by Don Etherington. Sewing holds the leaves together and attaches the text block to the supports, which in turn are used to attach the cover. The sewing structure is not normally visible unless the spine has been damaged. The sewing can be simple or complex, resulting in structures of varying robustness. Flexible leather bindings allowed books to open well, but the leather on the spine tends to become creased, ruining any decoration. Rounding and backing provided a rigid base for tooling on the spine, but this type of construction caused the pages to fan out rather than lie flat. The hollow back was introduced in the 1790s. As the covering material is not glued to the text block, this design opens well and does not compromise the spine decoration. However, with this type of binding, a great deal of strain is placed on the joints. Damage to a binding threatens the survival of the text that it contains. Detached boards or broken sewing mean that the pages become loose or torn. In cases of severe damage, there may be no alternative but to rebind the book. However, alternatives to rebinding, such as boxing, can allow for more of the original structure to be preserved. Opening books to a 180-degree angle causes damage, as this action places unnecessary strain on the most vulnerable parts of the binding. Books should be open only as far as the binding will comfortably allow. In most cases, this is a maximum of 120 degrees. However, some historic bindings should only be open to 90 degrees or less. Frequent use of a book can result in the creation of a preferential break in the spine, usually at the point where it is most frequently opened. Pre-existing damage like this can enable a book to be opened flat without the application of force. However, this practice should be avoided as it may place strain on the remaining sewing. Often, this is where it all begins. Damage, strain, and warping can occur as a result of the way that books are shelved and retrieved. Common shelving issues include books being packed in too tightly, books being allowed to lean over, books being shelved with their foredge facing downwards, heavy items piled on top of less robust items, unstable or inappropriate shelving, or perhaps not enough shelving. When fetching a book from the shelf, it's preferable to avoid hooking the head cap with your index finger, as this will result in damage to the top portion of the spine. When this action is used repeatedly, the head cap and end bands and spine can become loose or even detached. Unfortunately, this type of damage is a common sight for book conservators. Instead, it's better to push the items on either side of your selected volume back a little, so that you can grasp the book firmly on either side of the spine. Alternatively, if there's adequate space above the volume, you could lay your hand on the uppermost surface and slide the volume towards the edge of the shelf. Having retrieved your book, it should be consulted at an uncluttered surface. Books should be stacked in piles of no more than 3, with the heaviest item on the bottom. These supports were developed in the 1980s by the late great Christopher Clarkson, a book conservator at the Bodleian Library. Designed to cradle books open at an angle of 120 degrees, the modular design allows for fine adjustments to provide optimum support and accommodate a range of different types of spine. Made from polyethylene foam, the wedges allow books to be supported over their entire surface, whilst ensuring that they do not slip. However, if used incorrectly, a Clarkson book support can place unnecessary strain on a volume. A complete Clarkson book support system comprises one base wedge, two side wedges, two rectangular risers, and one spine support. It's important to note that a riser should be placed beneath the relevant side wedge to support the board and the joint when the book is open towards the front or back. Snake weights should be used to secure the pages. Unless the book is very thick, risers are not needed for a middle opening. Book cushions are a simpler method of providing support for books during consultation. They usually contain polystyrene beads encased in a sealed bag with a detachable outer cover. Before the book is positioned on the cushion, it should be moulded into the desired shape with a vertical channel in the middle to accommodate the spine and joints. Additional cushions can be used if the profile is too flat. However, book cushions are inappropriate for large, heavy volumes as the weight of the boards can flatten the cushion, basically rendering it useless. Book sofas, like the grey one that you can see on screen, are a viable alternative, simpler to use than a modular Clarkson book support system, but more sturdy than a book cushion. The carefully designed shape adjusts gradually as reading progresses to cradle volumes where needed, but without allowing them to open too far, thus limiting strain on the spines and joints. Like a book cushion, the book sofa contains polystyrene beads encased in a sealed cotton bag with a detachable cover. I also want to mention untrimmed edges or bolts. These are the edges of a printed book not cut or trimmed by the bookbinder, possibly because the binder assumed that the book would be rebound by the purchaser and the bolts cut at that point. Such books are difficult, if not impossible, to read because the uncut sheets are literally folded closed. For rare and valuable books, slicing open the pages can affect the value. However, in most cases, opening the pages will protect the volume from being accidentally damaged. At the library, in most cases, the edges are cut before a reader is allowed to consult the book. However, adequate training and appropriate tools are required. Only trained personnel are allowed to cut bolts at the library, and they use a specialised flat-bladed tool called a shoe knife. However, as a fail-safe, permission is always sought from the appropriate curator before such work is carried out. Usually, fold-outs in books show illustrations, diagrams, and maps. Unfortunately, they're often damaged during consultation. They're weakest along the folds and at the point where they attach to the volume. Even after conservation, some cannot be handled as they were originally intended. Digitisation offers a solution for readers who wish to access fragile foldouts. However, foldouts should not be removed to facilitate the digitisation process, especially if they're still securely attached. When handling foldouts, make sure you pay attention to the format and condition. Have weights and supports ready and enough space to unfold the item fully. Fragile multi-directional foldouts may require additional support. Finally, to avoid creating additional creases, they must be refolded according to their original configuration. So I'm now going to talk a little about documents and family papers. As family historians, you're likely to have encountered a variety of formats and document types. Historic documents can be stored flat, folded, or rolled. In addition, items can be stored singly or layered. Each of the formats presents its own specific handling and preservation challenges. Generally speaking, small flat items are easier to handle, consult, and store. And as a result, these documents usually suffer less damage, although their sheer quantity can be an issue when it comes to packaging. Folded items are more difficult to handle, as the creases may become weak over time, resulting in partial tears. In many cases, the folds can reveal a lot about the provenance of the document, revealing clues about how it was used, stored, or conveyed. For this reason, folds in archival documents should not be pressed out as part of a restoration process. Similarly, losses should not be infilled if these were caused by the breaking of a wax seal or the tearing open of a locked letter. Before you attempt to unfold or unroll a document, make sure that plenty of space is available. Items should not be allowed to hang over the edge of a table. As a document is unrolled, weights should be placed on the edges to hold it in position. When you're finished, the document should be re-rolled, again in its original configuration. Do not attempt to flatten a rolled document by yourself. That's a task that should really be carried out by a trained conservator. Before a document undergoes humidification and pressing, it must be cleaned to ensure that the dirt does not become ingrained. In addition, solubility tests must be performed to ensure that the media will not be damaged by the treatment. Historic documents have two primary elements: a paper support or a parchment support, and the media that conveys the information. Ink is the most common medium for printed and handwritten documents. It should be assumed that all media has the potential to fade as a result of extreme light exposure, and that ink can bleed or offset if it is exposed to moisture. Ink quality varies according to composition and the method of formulation. Its stability has a long-term effect on the paper support, and vice versa. Until the early 20th century, iron gall ink was the principal writing medium. It was inexpensive, easy to prepare, and could be applied to parchment and vellum as well as paper. It was also popular with architects, map makers, and artists from the 17th century onwards. The manufacture of iron gall ink involves mixing tannic acid from oak galls with iron sulfate, or vitriol. Iron gall inks contain sulfuric acid, which can lead to corrosion and disintegration of the support. Signs of degradation include halos and strike-through. Likewise, oxidation of the iron compounds present in the ink can also result in corrosion. Mixed with water-soluble dyes, iron gall ink was used in copybooks around the 1860s. Delicate copy papers are especially susceptible to the effects of ink corrosion. Dye-based inks, on the other hand, like those used in biros, markers, and felt-tip pens, are another common medium. They are also used in many inkjet printers. Synthetic aniline dye emerged in the middle of the 19th century as a cheap and useful colorant. They have poor light stability and a high sensitivity to moisture. If a document becomes wet or damp, the ink will bleed or run, and that's an irreversible issue. To preserve documents with dye-based ink, moisture ingress and excessive light exposure must be avoided. Although many historic records can be stored safely inside polyester enclosures, as polyester holds a small electrostatic charge, it's not suitable for the storage of prints, drawings, or documents with friable, flaking, or degraded media. I'll now hand over to my colleague Joe Jackson, who's going to talk about damaged documents in a little more detail and about how to consult and store them before going on to discuss photograph preservation and archival quality packaging. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks, Shona. So my name is Joe Jackson. I'm the Preventive Conservation Intern at the National Library of Scotland. Preventive conservation means I essentially focus on more passive methods of conservation, so things like storage, environmental conditions, mitigating risks from pests, as well as providing training sessions such as the one in which we'll focus on today. Usually I focus on things like storage solutions, but today we'll be focusing as well on photographic collections care. So carrying on from Shona, these are a few examples of common damage which can be found on collection items. All these types of damage can be prevented relatively easily as long as proper training is provided, such as the training we're giving today. Being able to identify types of damage on collection items is an incredibly useful skill and can often help in preventing future damage by identifying the cause. For example, the presence of mold on items might indicate areas which have a high level of relative humidity. High relative humidity levels are often a result of improper insulation, areas nearby exterior walls, areas near windows. Attics and basements typically suffer from exceedingly high and low humidity levels depending on the climatic areas that they are located in. So the image you can see just on the left, which is an example of foxing. Foxing can often be identified by the dark reddish marks on the paper. This is typically due to the presence of trace amounts of metal or mold on the paper, which is then oxidized and then produced ferrous oxide, giving sort of a red marking. While this is not easily reversible, further foxing can be prevented by maintaining a stable environment without excessive humidity levels or fluctuations in humidity levels. So really thinking about where you're storing your collections, usually somewhere stable is typically at the center of a building, away from exterior walls. Pest damage can also be a very real threat, especially in areas with high humidity or ingress areas such as windows or doors leading directly to outside areas. A way of countering this could be to box collections, providing a buffer from exterior ingress, as well as storing collections away from areas with ingress such as gardens. You may also wish to consider any plants that you might have in storage areas, as they may provide ingress points for pests. In the event of large-scale infestations, a preventive conservator should be contacted to consult regarding any possible rehousing, extermination, or monitoring which might be required. I would not advise the use of bug sprays or pesticides, as these can often cause damage to collections. Therefore, a conservator should always be consulted before considering such a procedure. A lot of libraries and museums often try and stay away from using pesticides nowadays. There's only one or two proper pesticides that would be used, and to be quite honest, it's a last resort. It's rather more preferred to monitor such things and have more passive measures such as environmental controls. Creasing can also be an issue, particularly if the item has been folded for a significant amount of time. When consulting material in this condition, it should be noted that attempting to flatten out folded material can carry a risk of further damage. I would advise in these instances, if you have to force an item flat, refrain from attempting to do so. Instead, consult a conservator regarding flattening items. One last aspect which isn't on this PowerPoint, which I'd like to touch on briefly, is fading. Often you'll see on book spines where bookcases are in direct contact with light coming from a window, or for example, UV rays can cause discoloration through a process called photochemical degradation. Therefore, thinking about positioning collections away from windows or installing curtains or blinds may be an ideal mitigation measure in these spaces which can prevent damage. It might also be worth considering that while appropriate storage can provide a good level of collections care, these items eventually need to be handled. Therefore, having an idea of the do's and don'ts when handling and displaying material can be invaluable. Relatively simple things such as using sticky notes directly on collection items, using paper clips, using highlighters and other drawing materials to make notes on collection items are all things that can cause damage to your items and should be avoided. You may also wish to refrain from eating or drinking around collection items to prevent any accidental spillages or stains. While at many archives or libraries, book supports may be available to use, you may not have these in your home. Book cushions, which can be bought from conservation retailers or even made in your home, can provide ample support when consulting collections material. While conservation treatments and repairs can often provide solutions to many collections care issues, such procedures should only be carried out by an approved conservator. However, this doesn't mean there's nothing you can do to look after your collections at home. Correct storage solutions can provide a great way of protecting collections from future damage and can even stop current damage from getting worse. One way the conservators at the library protect single sheet material is to store them in a fascicule. However, a simpler method may simply be to store items in archival quality 4-flat folders or boxes. You can also use polyester sleeves, which can be purchased from a wide variety of conservation resource retailers. It should be noted that while storage materials should be of archival quality, anything not labelled as such can possibly contain volatile organic compounds present from the production of that material. Such volatile organic compounds can cause chemical damage, such as discoloration through acidification and embrittlement. I'll leave a list of the retailers at the end of this PowerPoint, as well as a slide showing the conservation register, which will be able to direct you to any conservators that you require. There are many different types of photographic processors, and a while ago, well, I won't go into too specific details today. I will give you some advice on how to provide care for your photographic collections. Probably the most important aspect for caring for photographic collections is to practice correct handling. Photographic material can be extremely fragile and susceptible to damage if improperly handled. Therefore, it is typically recommended that gloves are worn at all times when handling this type of material. The most appropriate type of glove would be nitrile gloves, preventing any chemical transference while providing a barrier between yourself and the collection. While white cotton gloves may be the popular choice, and you'll often see a lot of conservators wearing these potentially, they might not be appropriate for certain types of collections. While they might be appropriate for large-scale objects, some more fragile objects might contain a risk in regards to the cotton fibers, which might snag on loose sections of the item, potentially causing accidental damage while handling. The same goes for many other collection types. While gloves should be worn, the surface of the photograph itself should never be touched. Contact can disturb the binder holding the image to the support and may cause irreversible damage, as you can see in this particular image where somebody's touched the image even without gloves on, and it's actually taken part of the image away. But these are just an example of some of the types of gloves. You've got the cotton gloves on the left, you've got the vinyl gloves on the right, which while provide maybe more protection than the white cotton gloves you can see on the left, don't sometimes prevent chemical transference. So nitrile is always the best way to go with photographic collections. Some photographs may have their own storage solutions, such as daguerreotypes and ambrotypes. Typically, due to the fact that these are often glazed and bear their own casings, they usually remain in good condition. However, if problems arise, a photographic conservator should be contacted via the conservation register. The glass used in these types of items is often fairly rare and is often held under tension, making a home fix very difficult. So again, making sure that you're contacting a specialist rather than potentially doing it at home. Again, correct storage can provide both a great way of caring for collections as well as consulting them. Polyester sleeves can sometimes be used as a way of protecting and consulting photographs. However, this can sometimes be detrimental, as some photographs off-gas certain chemicals, which can speed up the item's degradation. Therefore, if you are using polyester sleeves, make sure not to seal them entirely, as good airflow will prevent a buildup of any damaging chemicals in this small area. Another option could be simply to store photographs in an archival quality 4-flap folder or a box, interleaving each photograph with acid-free paper or materials such as silver safe. These types of paper are ideal for interleaving and storage, as they not only prevent vibration between the items in storage, but they also prevent any chemical transference between them. Also, due to the fact that the paper has a pH value of around 7, there's no inherent risk from the paper itself regarding chemical influence on the items. Here is a list of well-known or used retailers when purchasing conservation materials, as well as a link to the conservation register, which can be used to locate collection-specific conservators appropriate to your needs. There's also a link to the library's video, which Shona mentioned, regarding handling collections. That concludes the training session. I hope this has been great use for yourselves, and I hope it's given you an insight on how to safely consult and look after your collections. Thank you.